Hello, and welcome back to Honest Faith Interviews. This week we are interviewing Rion Phillippi. Rion was one of my very first ideas for this channel. Rion has been a good friend of mine for a few years now and was a part of an experimental idea that I had a few months ago working with teenagers to talk about labels. And it was through that process that I figured, why don't we just film interviews and put them on the internet and talk about these things and see people as human beings? So this week is Rion Phillippi, and I hope that you enjoy this interview. All right, if I can get your name and age.
Rion Phillippi. I am 28 years old.
All right. What do people need to know about you before hearing about your faith?
People, things to know about me. Um, I I grew up in the church. Both of my parents are very involved in the church. I have sort of fallen away from it in past years, um, but I do still consider myself a member of the faith, as it were. And I've been told I have a little bit of an interesting view on these things, predominantly anytime I start talking about Judas Iscariot. But um, outside of that, I don't think there's anything too particular about me in specific.
All right. So, what would you say is the most significant moment of your life and why?
Significant moment, just like in my life in general or in my life in faith?
In your life in general.
Um, Honestly, the most defining moment of my life that I can think of was my attending, not really an event, but my attending a grad school. Because it took a while until I really figured out where I needed to be focusing myself. In in undergraduate, I was a theater major for a long time, and I loved theater, but it wasn't the perfect fit. And the when I switched my major from theater to writing studies, the program at my alma mater, Niagara University, is a much more generalized writing studies branch than it is specifically directed toward anything. And so I never, I was always much more interested in the creative writing aspect, and it had a lot more of the sort of technical writing. And so it wasn't really until I went to grad school at Carlow University in Pittsburgh that I really sort of found my people, as it were. I figured out where I fit. I found the place where I could best describe myself. And so over, those 3 years, that sounds right, that was really sort of what shaped who I am moving forward.
All right. And what is your faith story?
As I said, I've grown up in the church. I'm a cradle Episcopalian. I was baptized when I was, let's see, that was in June, so I would have been about 6 months old. Um, it's a memorable story in my family. I screamed through most of it. Um, and, all throughout uh, my childhood, all throughout high school, I attended church at the same church pretty much all through my growing up life. I went through diocesan ministries, I went to happening, I went through summer camps. It helps that my father was the director of youth ministry in the diocese by the time I was of age to be doing all these things, so I just sort of got shuttled along with him. And I was fine with that. I was perfectly content to attend. But when I went to college, my Niagara is a Catholic campus, and while Episcopalianism and Catholicism are similar to each other, they are not that close. And I never quite fit in on campus, and there wasn't ever a strong presence on campus for pretty much anyone that wasn't Catholic. They didn't exclude you, they just didn't really have anything for you.
Hmm?
And the surrounding Episcopal churches, I knew some friends that went to them, but they never really spoke to me, and so sort of over those 4 years. During the summers, obviously, I still went back to my home parish, but for most of those years, I didn't really attend. And I think at that point, it was when I started slowly attending less and less. When I came home, I did attend again. Most recently, I am a member of a church here in Richmond, where I'm living now, but I have not attended as of late due to personal conflicts with the congregation.
Okay. Well, I don't blame you, and well, that answers a few of the questions, so that's good. But I want to ask how your faith has really influenced your life.
Um, it's interesting because a lot of people have these very sort of not meaning to sound disparaging, but they have these very grand stories about their faith, and it leads them and it does all these wonderful things. And in my life, it's always been more of an undercurrent. I've had a lot of friends that have either been agnostic or atheist or pushed away from a church for one reason or another, and I've always been the one that's like, hey, I know about the Jesus dude. I'll talk to him about it if you want, but if not, that's cool. And they're like, okay, cool. And maybe it never came up again, but I've let it be a guide to the way I work in my life without ever saying that it's doing that. I just let it sort of be the moral compass, and I don't find it necessary to tell everyone, hey, I do nice things because I'm a Christian, because I don't really think that's true. I don't think that's the real core of it. It's that I have grown up in a life that celebrates Christian values, and I have simply implemented them into my life. And so I think that I am a good person because of it. I don't necessarily think I'm a better person because of it.
That's a good point. Um, Now, this can be your answer to this can be either specifically about your Episcopal faith or about your larger faith as a whole, where it being Christianity. What do you find is the hardest thing to believe about your faith?
That's a good question because I mean a lot of Christianity has a lot of stuff that are very hard pills to swallow. It's the it's we have this God and he did all of these things and he's actually three people but not really he's only one. You're like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
And I mean that is what faith is. It's the trusting in the impossible, in the unbelievable. But as so many of my things come back to, I think in the end is that I refuse to believe in, and maybe this is not quite the answer that we were shooting for, but there are two sections sort of that I've seen of how people interpret, particularly the Christian faith, but I've seen it in pretty much any faith I've studied, is that there are those that take everything very seriously and very literally, and those that use it more as guidelines and metaphor. And the literal interpretations I find very difficult to believe. I refuse to believe that any God that I would, acknowledge or worship or anything like that would damn anybody for who they are.
Mhm.
I don't think that, and that extends, and if I'm using it in the broadest spectrum, we can get into social issues and all that jazz, but even specifically in the concept of faith, it's when it's my point that I always get to is I refuse to believe that Judas Iscariot is damned. He did what he needed to do, and Jesus knew that.
Yeah.
And so, and you see it in all the Gospels. It's just this is the man possessed by Satan, and I'm like, no, no, it's just no.
Yeah. So, what would you say is the biggest problem facing your faith? And again, this is either your corporate faith, being the Episcopal Church or Christianity, and on top of that, what would be the biggest problem encountering your faith personally?
Like biggest issue for me in terms of my faith, or
Yes.
hmm. um.
Sorry, it's a very complicated question.
No, it's fine. It's getting my head around the wording of it. Um, in many ways, I don't think this is specific to me, but I think it's something that I'm finding myself struggling with at the moment. As I said earlier, is that the concept of forgiveness
Mm-hmm.
and being able to move past that kind of barrier. Because I think, we as humans have a tendency to hunker down and hold grudges and growl at people that get near us after they've hurt us. And that's very much not necessarily the lesson that we are taught from the stories that we are told Jesus said.
Mm-hmm.
70 times 7, and we're supposed to be able to let these things go. And I struggle with that because I'm angry at some of the things that happened in the church that my family attends. I'm angry at some of the things that are still happening at the church that my family attends. And I find it very difficult to go back there because I still have this anger, and I understand that most of it is not personal attacks, but they feel personal, and it's harder to move past that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great, and thank you so much for answering honestly about that. Um, let's take it to the larger church. Let's talk about your denomination in particular, the Episcopal Church. What would you say is the largest problem facing the Episcopal Church right now?
They don't listen to one another.
Okay.
And in many ways, that's a reflection of the personal one. But most of what I see in sort of the larger overarching church is this lack of communication. It's that we've taken "don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing" way too literally.
All right.
And it's proving divisive. I mean, there was a huge schism. Oh God, I don't even remember when it happened, but over the when Bishop Gene Robinson was made a bishop. There was a huge break in the church at that point. And I feel like that major break caused a lot of sort of spiderweb shatters throughout the rest of what is still here. And so one side is saying one thing and the other side is saying something else, and they don't necessarily conflict with each other. They've just decided that they conflict with each other and that it can't be dealt with. Mm-hmm. And it's very frustrating.
Yeah, I'd agree. All right. Let's shift gears a little bit back towards what you said earlier about your growing up in faith. Would you say that your faith has evolved over time, or would you say that it's more or less the same as it was when you were growing up?
I think that I think that it certainly evolved. In many ways, I think that if my faith had remained the same from when I was, in middle school, then I haven't done something right. And in many ways, because I'm a very different person from the one that I was, when I first went to junior high camp back in New York. It's a much simpler thing. And I mean, we see this in Bible stories and whatnot, but it's very much, there's the faith of the child that is very innocent and believing, and nothing is impossible at that point. And there was a large period of time where I didn't go to the church and I questioned everything. And I'm still to the point where I question some things. And so I've been exposed to more practices of faith and more people of different faiths. And so it's very much something that has evolved and shaped around who I am now and how I see the world. And I like to think that it's grown more open than it used to be.
All right. I'd agree. Now, with that evolved view of your faith, let's talk about God a little bit, the divine. I like to use the word divine because I don't think it has any gender kind of connotations on there. But what would you like the divine to tell you when you finally speak face to face?
Well, Kid, I'm glad you figured most of it out. It's one of those questions that it's bounced around in my head for a while because I've watched enough episodes of Inside the Actors Studio to have heard the question asked numerous times. And in many ways, I don't necessarily think that anything needs to be said. I want to show up and I want to see him smile and go, hey, I think there's a couple of people you might want to meet. And just have it be open and prove that what I've seen and what I believe in the concept of the divine is that, that I am simply one more child of Christ, that I am just one more person that is beloved of the divine. And when, my life here has come to an end, that they're like, all right, good job. Thank you. I appreciate your work. And now it's time for you to rest.
What do you think the divine cares about the most?
Intention.
Hmm. All right.
Because it's I know there's a story and I can't quote it properly, but somewhere in the Bible talking about, if basically words are empty and acts are more. It's, I can say all these words and it's the sound of a gong and a drum. I don't know. I'm losing all of the words I had. But, without anything behind it, they don't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I generally end up talking to people, especially any of my friends that aren't of a practice of faith, and they say, do you think that because I'm not a Christian, because I'm not Catholic, because I'm not whatever, does that mean that I'm, cursed, damned for all time? And I'm like, no, I don't think you need to be. I think you need to be a good person, but I don't think in order to be a good person, you have to be a Christian or any member of any walk of faith. I've known plenty of people that aren't Christians and are, members of other faiths and still live good, pious lives. And I think at that point, whoever the divine is, whoever's interpretation is closest, I think at that point they smile on us.
All right. Well, if you could change one thing about the world, what would it be?
Oh, jeez. One thing about the world. The level to which we as people are so inwardly focused.
All right.
And I'm just as guilty of that as the next person, but it's frustrating, and especially in the past, couple of months or whatever, watching the world, especially here in the U.S., just sort of dissolve around itself. It's all very inward focused on all sides. Is everyone's focused on me, and it's me against them. And the real world doesn't work like that. We're all in the same boat, and if we don't all work together, then the boat's going to sink.
All right. Do you have any regrets regarding your faith? Is there anything that you wish you could have done, or you wish you were doing at this moment, in regards to your faith?
I mean, I think I could probably, if I really sat down and thought about it, there's something that I could come up with, I wish I'd done this, I wish I'd been more involved here, I wish I could have changed this. But in the end, I'm relatively happy with who I am right now, especially in regards to my faith. And so, no, I don't think I'd change anything, because if I did, there's no guarantee I'd end up where I am.
All right, that's a good answer. Who would you say that is your faith role model? The person that you would say, man, I wish I had faith like that.
My best friend, whose name is Kira Yaversky, and I will throw her out there because she's fantastic.
All right.
Kira and her whole family, honestly, but Kira's been my best friend since I was in about second grade. Her family are all very devoted in their faith, and in very many ways, they exemplify everything I believe a Christian should be. They are very strong in their faith, but they don't push it on you. They emulate what I've tried to do. They simply live the life that Christ, I believe, would have intended for them. And they are kind, and they are selfless, and they are wonderful human beings. And she's put up with me through more nonsense than anybody should ever have to deal with. And through it all, she's just smiled and been like, well, this is what we do, and we're going to get through this. And even now, she lives 6 hours away from me or something, I know that, if something falls down in my life, I can pick up the phone and go, Kira, I need help. And she'll be there.
Great. Now, moving on to this next question, I have to preface this a little bit. I was a little unsure of the wording in how to ask this in a way that was not negatively conno- connotations, any negative connotations on this question. So I use the word struggle, personal struggle. It in no way implies that it is negative in any way, but have there been any personal struggles that have had you question your faith, such as sexual, gender, or mental identity, or any other issue that really kind of had you kind of put at odds with what your faith has been?
Oh yeah, and I think that's natural. But no, there have been plenty of times when I look at either the life I'm living or the life that is sort of around me, and it makes me wonder. My mother has several very serious illnesses and has my entire life, and yet she's one of the most devoted people of faith that I know, and it's baffling to sit there and be like, but so why is this happening? It's the question of, if God cares so much, then why is this bad thing happening to this good person?
Yeah.
And so, I struggled with it there. I struggled with it watching, my father's arguments with his jobs, with my friends' arguments with their jobs, and it's because I'm like, these are good people and they're doing good things, and nobody seems to be noticing, or at least the people that need to be noticing don't seem to be. And that's very frustrating. And yeah, in my own, I feel like maybe I got lucky in the church that I grew up with, and that when I started dealing with my gender identity and being non-binary and being fluid, I never questioned that my church would accept me. I don't expect them to understand particularly, but most people I talk to don't completely understand, and I'm okay with that. But, I've never felt that somehow if word got out that Ryan's not quite all whatever, I don't think I'd be shunned. I don't think I'd be pushed away. But there's an element of that I think lurks in the back of, almost anyone's mind, but definitely in the back of mine, that says, if I am this different, if I am this not what everyone seems to be, does that make me somehow apart from the rest of the flock, as it were?
Mm-hmm.
And that's difficult sometimes, because I try to be a good example for other people, that are non-binary, that are questioning, that have stepped away from the church, and I try and be very open about it, and that I want them to know that they can rely on that, but that it shouldn't be everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know a lot of people that they have been so wrapped up in the church that when something about them breaks, in terms of that, growing up in a very conservative household and then coming out as anything in the LGBTQ spectrum, it shatters. And at that point, they can't figure out how to exist as themselves anymore, because they have been so entrenched in the religious dogma, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
that they cannot believe that they can still be loved.
Yeah.
And that's what I want, that I try and steer people away from, and show them that it doesn't need to be like that. It can be very difficult, and I've seen it happen. And it's not to say that, if you're in the LGBT spectrum, that you shouldn't be a person of faith, because that makes literally no sense. But I know that there can be that struggle.
Yeah. Is this an ongoing conflict for you, or have you resolved it in some way?
I mean, I think it lurks every once in a while, but for the most part, it ends up sounding like a bit of a throwaway line, but it is sort of the one thing that I've taken and held on to that I really like, is that we always talk about how men and women are created in God's own image.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are both, are you not more perfectly like God?
That's a good one. That's actually the first time I've heard that one. So,
and so and that's what I hold on to. And no, I don't think that I am somehow the more perfect vision of God, because that's silly. But I like the concept of it. It's that if both man and woman are created in the image of Christ, then living somewhere in the middle ground is also okay.
all right. Well, How has that changed your approach to faith? How has that conflict really kind of you sort of touched on this a little bit when you were defining that struggle, but has this moved you in a different direction than you feel you were originally going in?
I think it's made me more cautious. I think it's made me more sort of curious, more questioning,
All right.
because it does set me off of the standard path. You know, there is the wide path that the vast majority of people follow, and then there's a lot of little ones where the rest of us live. And it ended up pushing me off onto one of those little paths, and so I have to think a little bit more about where I'm stepping and what I'm saying and what I'm doing and where my feet are going, and is that rock going to trip me and fall on my face?
Hmm.
It requires a little more conscious effort to know where I am and what I'm doing in terms of faith, so that I can not only live my own personal faith the best that I can, but be a good image of who I am for the rest of the congregation at large.
All right. Has your faith defined your politics? And since we are coming upon our a very important time in the American year, this is a trendy question for the moment.
I like to think not, but again, it comes back to what I said earlier, in that I believe that my faith has simply sort of defined the way I live my life in general. And so there are moral standards that have been set in me because of the faith that I have grown up in, but I do not assert them as, this is my Christian faith belief, ergo this is wrong. And we do see a lot of that in politics, is the people, you know, this is built on a Christian nation, Jesus says no. And we'll see a lot of that in a lot of different aspects. And honestly, most of politics does this, but especially when anything like that starts happening, it just makes me tired. Because it feeds back into, I just think everybody should get along. And it's like, all of the commandments Jesus specifically gave us start with the word love. And to sit there, and I don't care what the topic is, if you sit there and say, no, this is wrong, Jesus said it's bad, Jesus said nothing of the sort. Jesus wants us to love. And building walls and setting barriers and building all of these fences around whoever we've decided to build a fence around at the moment is inherently antithetical to Christianity at large.
All right. Well, this brings to the forefront another question that was submitted by another Episcopalian, which I thought was interesting. But do you believe that the U.S. was founded as a Christian nation?
No. I think there's a whole bunch of wording in various political documents like the Constitution and whatnot that I can't quote because I'm not that well versed in it. But I think there's more than enough evidence that shows that it was founded exactly opposite. Is that it was intently set to not be defined by religion. And I know I've seen the quotes and I can't come up with any of them, but I genuinely think that if our various founding fathers saw that particular argument, they'd just shake their heads and start throwing things.
All right. What are your views on American exceptionalism? Do you believe that it exists? Or do you believe that Christians should be pursuing this?
What do you mean by exceptionalism?
I'll have to ask the question writer, but I'm guessing it means that that America is the greatest country in the world, that it was God's founding country, that God has favored us above all others, and that's the kind of subtext that I'm getting from that question, but.
And so what are my views on
American
exceptionalism, and do I think Christians should be pursuing it?
Yes.
There is a lovely scene at the beginning of a television show I'm a big fan of called The Newsroom, in which Jeff Daniels has a wonderful speech about how America is not the greatest country in the world, and he goes off on this tirade that is very typical of his character. And I've always loved that scene, because basically I agree with him. I don't necessarily agree with how he delivers it, but No, I don't think we're the greatest country. I think we're very good in a lot of things, and I think we're really behind in a lot of things as well.
Hmm.
I think we could be. I think we could do much better, and I think we could be the forerunner for a lot of change that needs to happen in the world. But again, it's all very introspective, it's all very self involved. And so we never move past that. And so we're stuck with our America is the greatest flag, and we don't ever actually question that or do anything about it. And as Christians, to simply accept that as stagnant and true, I don't understand, because we should be able to see the falseness in the statement and be able to work toward making it better and being that great country that we could and have the means to be.
All right. Now, moving on to a different current event, have you heard about what's been going on in the Caribbean after the aftermath of Hurricane Matthew?
I don't believe so, not specifically.
Well, in the hurricane of Hurricane Matthew, Haiti has well, you know, a lot of the infrastructure and things were kind of decimated in the in parts of the Caribbean from the earthquake a few years ago.
Yeah.
And Hurricane Matthew ended up with a few thousand that have been killed due to this. And so I want to kind of focus on this and on Syria, what's going on abroad in the Middle East as well. Um, does your faith drive you to want to do something in those parts of the world? And do you know if there is an arm of your faith currently there doing something?
I don't know if there's an arm of my faith currently doing something. I would like to believe so, but I don't necessarily know that there is. And inevitably, yeah, anytime something like this happens, my heart always goes out to all the people affected. Seeing the catastrophic damages in Haiti after Matthew, and seeing all of the various issues, more recently in Syria, but there's been so many others. Yes, I desperately love to be able to do something. And in many ways, I don't know what. And so I don't know that I personally, physically can do anything. I don't necessarily, I'm not in the monetary position to do anything. But the problem is, I know that, as has gotten raised several times recently over the past year or so, saying thoughts and prayers doesn't do anything necessarily. I think it's important to, as people of faith, to support these communities, in our thoughts and in our prayers and send those up. But we do have to actually do something. Words are nice, but again, words without action are empty. And it's painful, because I feel like every time I turn around, something else has happened. I saw arguments around I don't remember when it was, but the French attack, the bombing. Um, there, everyone was talking about France, and sometime, like within 24 to 48 hours of that attack, there had been a different attack somewhere else further east, and that wasn't getting as much news. And so there's this huge furor in the social justice world of the internet saying, why are we talking about France and not this other thing? Why are we talking about, this thing and not that thing? It's like, well, because if we talked about all the terrible things that are happening and all the things we should support, we'd never talk about anything else. Because there's so much pain and anger and destruction in the world right now that we can't focus on all of it. We have to find something, and talking about a country that most people have heard of is going to get more of a response than one that maybe not as many do. And do I think that's unfortunate? Absolutely, because in many ways I think France is probably more equipped to fix themselves in the long run than many of the Eastern countries that are being devastated by this sort of thing. But I end up feeling very helpless in a lot of these things, because I want to do something and I don't know how to help.
Well, you just had said about about pain that there are things that we are not talking about. And I want to leave with this last question here, which is there something that your faith, is there an issue that your faith is not talking about? Is there something that you wish that your faith would talk about? And how should we talk about that?
Um, that's a good question, honestly. Because I think we're not talking about a lot of things, or if we are talking about them, we're not talking about them in any sort of helpful manner. Um, but it's probably because it is the closest to home for me, is that we're not really talking about the exclusion of the LGBT spectrum. Is that there are, even in the fact that, my faction of the Episcopal Church was the one that, gave the thumbs up to Gene Robinson and said he was cool. Um, and so we're the gay friendly version, uh, in the grand spectrum wide brush version
Hmm.
of that. But the problem is we're not really. Like, we've accepted that Bishop Robinson is lovely regardless of his sexuality, but it becomes the concept of it's okay if they're gay, but as soon as they show up here in our parish, then that's a different story.
Hmm.
As soon as it's my son or daughter or whomever, my child, then it's a different story. And so we don't ever really talk about the fact that there's a very large hole that people fall into at that point. And these are still people who want to feel closer to a divine presence, and we're not really, I don't want to say catering to them, because it sounds like that's, more opinionated than I want it to be. But we're not evangelizing to them. We're not reaching out to them in any specific manner. We're just hoping that the general nets we're casting will catch them too. And the problem is they're falling through the holes in the nets, and we're not actually helping any of them.
Hmm. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for your time. I really
Thank you for
appreciate it.
watching. This week, I ask that if you keep in mind to pray for the Phillippi family, or send good thoughts out, no matter what your faith orientation is. They came on some really rough news this week, and just ask that you send some good thoughts and good prayers their way. Thank you so much for watching. Again, like, share, subscribe, and we'll be back next week with some more Honest Faith interviews.